Ah, the Old Citizens Band magazine from February 1984. A cracking read. Back then in the day it was full of pictures of women clutching hold of equipment we just know they never would be clutching hold of these days. But in this magazine it also included a nice review of the MAXCOM 30E radio, which had been out for a year or so, I believe, by the time this magazine had got their hands on it. So anyway, I went looking for a MAXCOM 30E, having always been after one, and never really wanted to pay the big money for one. So I went to eBay with the mind to get one cheap, and I found this. And there was quite a few reasons why it was so cheap, and if you carry on watching this video you'll see why. But as you can see, this has been a barn find. This particular eBay seller has a few radios on there, and I've seen a few since that are all in a similar condition. This one had the knob snapped off, the actual shaft snapped off on the knob, and as you can see here, it sat in a bucket of water for quite a while and was fairly badly corroded, and this sort of condition was all over the radio, the case inside and out. I've not seen one quite as bad as this, and even to the point where any component with any ferrous metals on the board just rusted away. So this was going to take some work, and but I accepted the challenge. I had a bit of time on my hands, so we thought we'd give this very corroded radio a test to see if we could bring it back from the dead. For most people, that broken knob would almost certainly be turn this into a scrap chassis for most. Anyway, as you can see, the corrosion continues across the switches there, but funnily enough, it's still got all the dust protection on it. So anyway, the first thing to attack was with the isopropyl alcohol, which cleaned up that board quite nicely, as you can see there. It got all the old muck off of it and brought it up nicely and got rid of all the flux that gets onto the back of them. Now, I don't normally use dishwashers to clean these parts. I prefer to do it by hand so I can keep an eye on how they're being affected by the cleaning process, and this cleaned up rather nicely. The diode inside it had been shorted out and blown, which is why it wasn't coming on initially. Turning the radio on, I was getting received. A transmit light was coming on, but we weren't getting any transmit power. It wasn't going into transmit, and I stumbled upon this fairly quickly, actually, that the drive transistor, the main output transistor, had lifted, the track had lifted off on the back there, as you can see. So I soldered that back down and quickly tried it, and lo and behold, I was quite surprised to find, although it was slightly off frequencies, they always are, that the radio was actually producing some good power there, 5 watts on my non-selective Welts meter there. So, you know, good CB watts output there. So with this in mind, and knowing that the radio was good, I decided that we would have a go at bringing this back from the dead. So starting off with the shaft, because this was the deal breaker really, I decided to attack this problem first, and I drilled a couple of holes into the shaft with the idea of designing a new knob, a custom made knob, and then attaching the knob to the shaft with some grub screws. So I was quite surprised at how well this worked. It was literally a 20-minute job to actually design the knob in 3D there and print it off, and the knob came out nicely there, and I tapped threads in the knob and popped it on the shaft, and I was amazed at how well this worked. Really pleased with that. So that's the first save and the most major one. Now, it's always nice to get the factory mics with these radios, and this was no exception, although this mic was in absolutely terrible condition. The cable had been stretched over time and was broken internally, so that had to be replaced, and there was also a lot of damage on the inside. Both of the lugs at the top of the bracket there had snapped off, and for most people this would be just a bin and forget it, but as I said, it's nice to, if you can, repair these if you've got the time. So I took all the components apart, including the mic element there, and even that switch, I took that completely apart and cleaned all of the contacts inside the switch, and it's amazing what a little bit of time, a little bit of patience can do. Okay, I mean, you won't be making a living doing that, but it's nice to actually bring these things back from the dead, as they were. So I manufactured a new bracket piece and glued that into the microphone, as you can see there, which means the microphone can now be held together properly. And then I started to work on some of the corrosion on the main board where these components had sat. As you can see, all these trimmer pots were quite bad, and so I replaced them, every single one of those that had been corroded. I moved on to the casings outside. Now, as you can see, these are rather bad, and I've got a Black & Decker mouse sander there, which is an excellent tool for taking these down to bare metal, as I really needed to do. The corrosion was so bad with these. If you don't do that, the corrosion will simply come back through your paint. So if they're really rusty like this, you really must get all of that rust off, or at least convert it somehow. So after a little bit of graft and a bit of grinding, you can see these almost come down to the bare metal again, which it provides the absolute best surface for repainting, as you'll see a little bit later in the video. So I was really pleased how these cases come out. It took probably about 40 minutes to get to that point. So again, you're not going to be doing this to make a living. So anyway, I used some of my usual gold paint to tart up the outside of the case, which again had seen better days and was quite badly corroded. But the hand painting is nice, and it certainly looks better than it does originally. As I said, the microphone cable had to be replaced for a new one. I popped a new plug on the lead there. Sometimes you just, if you can't repair the lead, it's got to be replaced. So I was really pleased how these brackets came out, and managed to put a new screw in there into the back of the mic, and the mic is almost as good as new. I think it certainly worked very well. And in the absence of any radio to test it on, I tested it on another MAXCOM chassis radio, the Midland, and it worked nicely on that, so I knew it was good to go. Even little details like these clamps for the brackets, where would you get those from? So I decided, rather than throw them away or 3D print anything, I would repair these, and I used this Genolite rust converter. And what this does, it converts the rust into a non-rusting paintable surface, and I used these and then painted these gold, as you'll see a little bit later on. So back to the transmit side, I decided to set the deviation with my new Heathkit deviation meter, and as you'll see there, I also set the frequency. The deviation meter has turned out to be very useful, and I'm using that in conjunction now with a proper signal generator, as you'll see a little bit later on in the videos, to get these radios absolutely spot on and to set the deviation and the receive side. I also invested in a new scope. As you can see there, my old one was taking up far too much room, which is great for setting up the audio on these radios. So there's the knob in place, and I also bought some new brass screws, rather expensive, but these certainly won't rust now to put the case back on. As you can see there, it's certainly cleaned up nicely with a little bit of paint and stuff, and I put the rust protection paint on there as well, so it's actually converted any corrosion into a paintable surface. And as you can see, from what it looked like originally, it's really starting to come on now and look rather spiffing. There's a fair old bit of elbow grease involved in doing this, as you can imagine, but still it's well worth doing. And there's the new signal generator that I've got, so I can now properly test the receive and set up the receive on these radios, and this radio is set up lovely. And very pleased with the cases and how they came out. As you can see here, the finish is slightly glossy. You can get the original matte finish on the cases, you simply have to heat them up when you spray them. But I went with gloss on this one. The original speaker was quite poorly, so we decided to replace it. There's the brackets as I've painted them up, and we popped a new speaker in the back of the case there as well. Like I say, sometimes you just can't, use the old stuff. It just has to go. So I was really pleased with how that came out. It looks nice and new, and it certainly sounded nice when I was running the radio a little bit later on in the test. So there you go. I mean, it's always the case that the front fascias let the radios down, but there's not a lot you can really do with the plastic fascias at the front. It's really quite a lot of work to get those to look like new, but you can certainly go with the rest of the radio. And this paint was still curing actually at the time I took this video, hence the fingerprints on it. I actually polished those out, and it takes over a week sometimes for paint to cure. There's a difference between paint drying and paint curing. A lot of people don't know that, so if you are repainting these radios, just bear that in mind. It does take a little while for the paint to cure. So I thought it was time to give the radio a test, pop it on the shelf, and contact Mick just to do a quick radio check to see what he thought of it and how it sounded. But it certainly looks so much better than it did before. I mean, it's you can quickly forget actually, and I'll remind you there, there's a vast difference between the two states, and I'm just really pleased that we've managed to save this radio from being a scrap chassis, and we've brought it back into looking half decent at least anyway, and certainly it should be good for many more years to come. So let's go over to me with Mick now and just do a little quick local test of the new radio.
You're sounding very, very good. Lovely audio to me, anyway. I don't know what it'll be like on the video recording, but it's good audio. No white noise. Just plain good. BBC quality, not quite, but still good. So, yeah, and that's on a CP6, which is down the bottom end of the garden, so quite a few feet away, so from me. And I'm not picking up anything else. I can't hear anything else on the band anyway, Paul, but you're a bit higher than me. So, round to you, mate.
Yeah, Roger D. Okay, mate. Yeah, well, yeah, you're sounding good, really. I mean, you're about 2 miles from me, aren't you, as the crow flies, maybe a mile and a half.
And so that isn't too shabby. As you know, there's lots of local noise.
Right, I hope that you've enjoyed that. I think I definitely saved this radio from an early grave, so to speak, and we certainly saved it from being a scrap chassis. That's what the intention was here, and certainly, as I said, for a lot of people that broken knob there would have been the final problem with this radio. But as you can see, even those things can be overcome, and we managed to do that on this fix. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. Say if you've got a CB radio you want tuning up and setting up, or one that isn't working, contact me. I can do that for a fee. And if you're looking for more videos like this, keep an eye on the channel. There's certainly a bit more content. I'm going to try and get a video out at least every week now going forward, so we'll get some content out there for you guys and keep things moving along again. Okay, thanks ever so much for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.